Broadcasting live from the IRSMedic studios, it's Parental Advisory. And we're live on Parental Advisory. Welcome and thank you for joining us. Today we're talking about something that doesn't actually exist, apparently.
It doesn't, but people are convinced it exists, and so we're going to go with it.
Okay, federal tax amnesty.
Yeah, it doesn't really exist, but...
Hey.
Yeah, hey.
Hey, why not?
Yeah.
Now, we were talking about tax amnesty, and apparently, this is not the first version of tax amnesty in the history of time.
No.
It started way, way, way long ago.
Way back in the history lesson most people don't know and should know. Mm-hmm. Could you tell them about it?
The Rosetta Stone.
Yes.
It's not just a language learning program.
No, it's not.
But it's sad if you Google it. Those are like the top 5 hits.
Right. And the question that you ask anybody, ask any history buff, okay, the Rosetta Stone had something written on it. Mm-hmm. What was it?
It was the first tax amnesty program.
That's right.
Yeah. And
that is critical if you think about human history, because one of the themes of this podcast is that taxes are the hidden thing that drive human behavior more than anything. Mm-hmm. But no one talks about it.
No.
And no one speaks about it. So the Rosetta Stone, I'll let you give some history about it, but...
Yeah, and what I found a lot of the information in the book that you told me about when we first started the podcast, For Good and Evil, The Impact of Taxes on the Course of Civilization by Charles Adams. And it's one of those I bought on Amazon now, like one click, like Anthony told me to read this. And then I got it, and it's absolutely fascinating. I highly, highly recommend it for anybody if you're interested in its history, its taxes, its everything and anything. I love it. But so the Rosetta Stone, it was actually unearthed by one of Napoleon's officers near the town of Rosetta in northern Europe while he was trying to conquer Egypt. One of the first things he did when he took over was he tried to get Egypt, and he failed miserably.
They always want Egypt.
Yeah.
They're always going for Egypt.
Well, they're pretty badass.
I know, right?
Yeah. If you want something, you want Egypt.
Yeah.
They kicked him out really quickly.
But it's fun. He's in Northern Europe while he's trying to conquer Europe. Well, my first clue, when you're trying to conquer Egypt, go to Egypt.
So what he had his soldiers do is actually ransack as many tombs as possible before they left. That's where Egyptian artifacts sort of came from. They brought a ton of them back to France, and then they were sort of passed around among the rich in France, like, hey, look at this cool stuff I got. The English eventually seized the stone from the French. It's now on display in the British Museum of London, and I'd really actually like to sort of go see it.
I know. Now I actually do want to see that.
So it has a message inscribed. It's hieroglyphics at the top. It's called Demotic, which is another lost Egyptian script in the middle, and Greek at the bottom. So the first thing they said is it's very important that it was actually inscribed in 3 different languages, if you will. That was a really big deal. And the fact that it was put on stone as hard as marble instead of papyrus, which is what they put everything on, papyrus. They just scribed it on there. But the fact that there was multiple copies, think about how long it took. If you look at a picture, it's not just a few lines. It's a line after. It's a lot of inscribing. So that's how they knew that this was an extremely important, not document, but message. So it was, come to find out, it was inscribed around 200 BC. And what they did is they had a ton of people that knew all different languages. They had historians, and finally, transcribed everything that it said. Now, what's important to know is this was a time that the pressure of excessive taxation was destroying Egypt. Egypt has a pretty good history, I read, of sort of being able to tax as fairly as you can. But this was a time where there was a lot of civil war going on in Egypt. They'd been fighting for over a decade. So what happened was soldiers that had been fighting a successful military campaign in the East came home, and they found out that Egypt was now shackled by new tax burdens. Everybody was getting taxed. They revolted. Very bad fight. So it was a very young king at the time. To restore peace, he issued a proclamation for peace. And there was 2 really important provisions on this proclamation. I thought the first one was sort of funny. It's a general amnesty for the rebels. Like, hey, can you please stop kicking our ass? You don't have to pay taxes. And the second was an amnesty from taxes for the temples and priests who at one time had received, they were sort of left out of taxing, but then the new regime took over and were like, screw you, we're taxing you, we don't care who you are. So, part of this peace proclamation was a tax amnesty for temples and priests. Now, come to find out, that's what the Rosetta Stone is. There was many copies of the stone, and they were all placed at the entrance to temples, which read, "No entrance to those who have no business in this temple." And it was propped up along with a statue of the king. It was specifically placed there to keep out the king's taxmen. It was basically a no trespassing sign.
That is amazing. That is probably the best history lesson every high school. What you just did right there is what everybody should understand. The most fundamental thing about the United States. All countries in the world, when they fail because of taxation.
Yep.
That is the thing that will destroy. And usually what happens is the government realizes, whoa, we want to take as much as we can, but we're going to be out of power soon if we grab this much.
Yes.
So let's just back off a little bit. We'll look like good guys, but we'll still be in power. We'll be okay. Now, and also, there's really more than one Rosetta Stone.
Mm-hmm.
The Rosetta Stones, but they didn't call it that because they called it the cool amnesty thing.
Mm-hmm.
That is so amazing.
Yep.
And this is just so important. It's written, I mean, you went through the hard work of carving it in stone in 3 different languages. And Egyptian hieroglyphics are not very simple. They're drawings.
Teeny tiny.
You can't make a symbol for something. No, it's painstaking.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how important it was.
Yep.
And, that was the government doing it too. Like, okay, this is really important. We better do this. Otherwise, we're going to have a big time tax problem. So that's sort of the government catching wise to saying we're just beating up on people too much. Let's back off a little bit.
It's an easy power move. You don't have to worry about kicking anybody's ass. You just make a change to your tax system.
Yeah, and usually what happens is, when you tax something, you get less of it. And when you subsidize something, you get more of it. Well, if you tax income, guess what you get? Less income. Because people are like, well, I'm going to make sure my income's lower, and I'll do things to have a lower income. Mm-hmm. So when you have these amnesties that say, well, we're not going to tax income so much, all of a sudden, wow, it sort of income explodes. And we saw that in the 80s with the Reagan tax cuts. We saw income explode, and it happens. And so it's sort of one of these things is if, the psychopaths, I would say that word, in office just say, if you back off a little bit, guys, you'll actually get more. Mm-hmm. Try not to squeeze everything out of everyone. Let them give them the, make them think they're a little bit free.
Right.
And not under your rule all the time. Throw them a bone. And, a lot of states, the state tax amnesties are what exists. Mm-hmm. That's what they call them. The topic of this is federal tax amnesty, and I'm going to tell you why it's really no such thing, but people think of it like that. Mm-hmm. But states actually have amnesties.
Every single state?
I think mostly every state will have some type of amnesty at some point.
Gotcha.
That they're not rolling things. The IRS has rolling programs, ongoing.
Yes.
Okay? But the states will have an amnesty of sales tax amnesty. And usually a lot of states have the week before school going back into session, a sales tax amnesty on school clothes that don't exceed this amount of dollars. I guess they don't want you buying luxury goods, right? Like, this is needed just for...
This Gucci purse will fit my books perfectly.
Chinchilla.
Oh.
Yeah. What about a chinchilla? But actually, chinchilla is not that attractive.
No,
it's not. And you need like 1,000 rabbits, I think, to make it. And they're rabbits. I'm not going to lose sleep over it. But what it creates is somewhat ugly. Mm-hmm. It's like a zebra effect.
Yes, because they usually use different.
Yeah, well,
like light colored. Brown.
Well, each hide has a little bit of kind of black or gray in it, and so when it staggers, it looks somewhat disgusting.
Yeah,
I would go for fox. I think fox looks really attractive. Yeah, fox, of course. So they want to make sure you're not going to your luxury goods. Anyway, I think that's what we were talking about. Also, the other type of state. And Mississippi had a Second Amendment amnesty for ammunition and guns. That was pretty cool.
No way.
Yeah, I know. Like, we're right on civil rights. Woohoo!
So buy as much as you want for a certain amount of time, tax free.
Tax free. Yeah.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, I think that's awesome.
Chalk one from Mississippi.
Mississippi is showing the way.
Yeah.
Right on. I think that's a pretty interesting one. And then usually what you'll see in other states, if it's not a sales tax amnesty, there'll be a back tax amnesty, and it will have a date certain where it ends. And it's usually the state legislature saying, hey, look, we have a ton of people owing us money.
Mm-hmm.
Our collection sources aren't good enough. We can't find them. We're not going to get it. Why don't we give them a break to say, hey, look, pay this amount, and then we'll forgive all.
So is it a percentage or a flat rate?
Usually what it is Connecticut had one where it was basically a forgiveness of all penalties and interest.
Oh.
And that's usually what you'll find, because here's what you don't want to do. You don't want to, the state doesn't want to say, hey, pay us all your back taxes. We'll give you 50% off. Okay?
Oh.
Because
then.
Oh, all right. Well, this is what I'll do. I'll run up a big tax bill, wait for you guys to give that amnesty, and then perpetually, pay less. So the taxpayer who's doing the wrong thing
Got it.
gets the benefit over the person who's doing it every year. And so that's the balance. You're trying to collect revenue on one hand, but then you're trying to collect revenue on the other hand. So you have to find a balance. And so usually it's something like that where, like, look, pay it all. Just pay your taxes and we'll be done with it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that most taxpayers who do pay their taxes every year can kind of swallow. Like, all right, well, they weren't going to pay it anyway. And this made them, maybe they were able to borrow money from somebody to pay off something they were never going to get anyway.
Right. Because the penalties can add up you can go from $5,000 to $15,000 in no time at all.
Right. And a lot of this, something people don't realize, the IRS has a statute of limitations on the time to collect. Mm-hmm. And they move quicker or with more information, and they just have a better collections division.
Yeah,
the infrastructure, the rules, it's just bigger, it's better. States are so much smaller. You're talking, you could talk about a state agency that has I have to look at Vermont to see how many people there are, but I would imagine it's a couple rooms.
Oh, no kidding.
I'm going to imagine it's just there's not a lot of people there.
Yeah,
and they don't have all the procedures in follow-up, and what you end up with states is that typically things are run more by personalities as opposed to policy. Mm-hmm. A difference is California, that is so big, that's actually one of the best revenue departments to work with, because they have all these policies out, and if someone's trying to do some nonsense, you can usually call them out on it, and they're a little bit easier to work with. But the smaller states, they kind of make up their rules, and then somebody's going to be appointed the commissioner, and it's a political appointment, and what they know it's more of a, hey, Commissioner of Revenue Services, sure, and they don't know the first thing of anything, and they're just there to pose pictures. Mm-hmm. And then there's people behind the scenes who are actually running the things, and the people in charge aren't officially the people in charge.
Got it.
And things can kind of turn into a hen house a little bit. So it could be difficult to deal with, and that's why they are a little bit. That's the problem, is that these bills go on forever, because while states have offer and compromise programs, mm-hmm. they are very arbitrarily granted. There's not really in there the appeal. If somebody comes in with an offer, hey, we're going to submit an offer and compromise. We can we can put their package together, and I'm going to know. I'm like, this is going to work or it's not going to work. Mm-hmm. And 99 times out of 100, I'm right. It's just, that's how we know. Yep. When you're dealing with a state, it's like, well, this could save you a ton of money, or we could be wasting our time. And the reason why is because the states don't have a statute of limitations. Many of them don't. New York does. I just learned New York does. Yep. So a lot of the employees, most people's like, well, this person's really not going to be able to pay back this debt. And the person's 40 years old. Let's just say that, they have 20 more working years left. How much could they really pay each year? All right, you know what? This offer is pretty good for that. But no, this is what's actually been said to us, is that, like, no, we're not going to take that offer. And we're like, yeah, but this person doesn't have a lot of money. Well, they can win the lottery.
Shut the front door.
Yeah, like, yeah, you're right. That's possible. I guess maybe if I prove, well, actually, they've actually never bought a lottery ticket. It's actually against their religion to gamble. So, it is. Well, then I guess I'll grant it. Right. That's really what you're dealing with. Absolutely
frightening.
So, yeah, things are a little, usually, the states are really hit or miss, and it's kind of frustrating. Should someone hire you to deal with a state tax issue to settle it? it's hard to, weigh the pros and cons. They might want more than you can pay, and we can get it down to something reasonable. But are we going to wrap it up in a nice bow? Maybe. But we need to be paid.
You know what? It's pretty funny that it's like the first time I've ever heard you say it's easier to deal with the IRS in that case.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, the IRS is far easier to deal with, despite everything. I could tell you how it's going to go in that if we're told no here, we can go do this. If they say no here, we're going to do this. You can work around the system, and at some point, you will get someone reasonably. Again, this is 99 times out of 100. You'll get somebody reasonably, and that might involve going to tax court, where somebody says, "What the hell happened here?" Mm-hmm. That's what we're trying to say. Okay, yeah, let's get rid of this.
Yep.
But with the state, they sort of make up, and the states are just so hungry for revenue. Federal government makes its own money.
Yeah.
So whatever. Oh, you didn't pay it? That's all right.
Maybe we'll eventually find you.
Right, but the states actually need that money, and the state of Connecticut was issuing IOUs, or no, it was Illinois. I think it was issuing IOUs. We'll pay you. We'll pay you. Don't worry. Yeah. They didn't have the money. It wasn't there. So they actually need the revenue. Like, put it in there. Like, we need your dollar in the bank account.
It's like Kmart. We're out of that tuna fish sale. Here's an IOU. Okay, so after this first break, we're going to talk about federal tax amnesty, even though there's no such thing, right after this. The IRS takes us serious because we are serious.
We've earned our reputation, and we will protect our reputation.
The IRS knows exactly who we are.
We're full-time advocates, not part-time middlemen.
We are creative problem solvers, not dull form fillers.
We're lawyers. The others, they're not.
IRSMedic, the law offices of Parental, and Wynn, LLP. Real tax attorneys for tough tax problems. And we're back live on Parental Advisory talking about federal tax amnesty, even though there is no such thing.
Right. I think you could search the irs.gov, as our friend Eric says, to find amnesty. It's really not there, but people do, people think of federal tax amnesty as the word. The IRS doesn't use it. And again, the IRS is never going to give you that one-time reduction in your taxes just simply because you're going to pay. Mm-hmm. Very common thing is people call like, well, what if I pay the IRS in full? Won't they give me a break? No, because you're just doing what you're legally required to do. And again, they have taxpayers who have been doing all the right things all these years. Mm-hmm. It comes down to that cash crunch. The federal government does not have the same incentive as the state does. So they're not going to feel pressure like, oh, we really need that money in there. They're just going to raise the debt limit every time. Mm-hmm. Every time. There's really not that pressure for the federal government to collect money. So they can be a little bit more, hey, this is how we'll do it. If you can't afford to pay us, mm-hmm. prove you can't afford to pay us the entire bill within the collection period, and then we'll talk.
Okay.
But if it comes down to an ability to pay, then you'll pay the whole thing. Now, there are some very nice things that have come up recently. There's a one-time penalty abatement, mm-hmm. and pretty much everybody will qualify for that as long as you've been in compliance for 3 years at some point mm-hmm. before a penalty was assessed. So that's a really nice thing. So if you are looking to full pay the IRS, getting in that one-time penalty abatement is a good thing. The IRS has a reasonable cause penalty abatement. That one is a total hit or miss. I mean, that you could have, they don't care if you could have someone like, no, pay your whole taxes, even if you had cancer while the dog was run over, while the cat broke its legs. And, the sad story, you might not care. Or somebody could say, yeah, you know what, identify that because, I was a divorced man too, and my wife took all my money, so I know exactly what you're going through.
It's a very fair system.
Right. So the overall penalty abatement is something that we don't like all that much because, again, we're going to be doing all this work. And we don't know what's going to happen, and we don't want someone to hire us and say, "Oh, okay, well, you paid us this much money, and you can pay the IRS the whole thing because we weren't able to do anything for you." It's not really a great thing. Mm-hmm. There would be some lying involved, but with the one time, that there's really, probably a reason you can get it. And so that's one type of amnesty that the IRS doesn't call an amnesty.
Right.
They call it a one-time penalty
Now,
abatement.
moving forward, we'll reference the federal tax amnesty, even though that's not it, just for ease of conversation. Right. So here's my question. It seemed like the government said, all right, we're going to have this one-time tax amnesty thing. And then it rolled over to the next year. And then it's rolled over 8 times. Right. Is this really a one-time program? Do we see an end in sight? What?
Well, and that, now I guess I'll have to go back and contradict myself, because we did have some one-time amnesties of sorts, and one in particular was the 2009 OVDI, Offshore Voluntary Disclosure Initiative, that had a date. It was supposed to end September 15th, 2009. Well, they actually extended it to October 15th.
And then they just renamed it.
And that was really targeted for people who were banking with UBS. And the IRS was convinced that there was all these people who were intentionally evading taxes at UBS. And so, well, people were. Oh, okay. Yeah. We definitely, those were interesting clients. Oh yeah. This is a pretty good deal, because now I can, you pay 20% of your account balance, and you paid your taxes. You're like, all right, well now, you know what? Your amnesty's over. You don't have to worry about being criminally prosecuted, and you have access to your money. You could now bring it back to the U.S. You could, and you don't have to worry about anything. But what the IRS didn't realize, and I think what a lot of people didn't realize, is that the amount of money, or the amount of people with offshore accounts, far larger than the IRS anticipated. The reasons why people had offshore accounts, a minority of people were engaging in tax evasion. A majority of people, there was a reason why. They were living overseas. They're from that country. They inherited it from that country. Then also the types of things that are reportable, much more than people anticipate. It's just not bank accounts, but it's mutual funds, corporations, foreign life insurance. These are the things that are subject to penalties that actually don't start that statute of limitations that we're talking about. The IRS could have forever to assess you with it. So the IRS sort of realized, okay, we have a problem. Well, actually, they didn't realize at the time. They came up with their 2011 OVDI that had a date certain. It was going to expire, which I think also was extended. But I think it might have been extended because we had a hurricane, I think. And that had a date it was going to end. And still not a lot of takers. Not a lot of people, I was getting about half and half. People who were intentionally doing something, and people like, oh my God, what the heck is going on? So then in 2012, they sort of made, all right, we're going to just have this open. We're just going to have it open for anyone with offshore accounts, just like they have it open for people with domestic unreported income. If you've been evading taxes domestically, there is an ongoing voluntary disclosure program where you could say, okay, before there's an indictment coming, let me just come clean. And that's where we used to start doing this, when people were like, well, I was making this money and no one knew about it, so I was just doing it, but I better do it. I can't sleep anymore. And so just like the offshore, that's ongoing. Domestic is ongoing as well.
Okay. All right. And there's a few different types of amnesty, we'll call it. The first thing you say whenever you want to talk about amnesty is making sure you're in compliance. And what I thought was surprising is the IRS agent you're dealing with is trying to give you every chance not to prosecute you. I don't know why that surprised me. Maybe because I'm getting hardened against the IRS, but they actually want to work with you.
Yeah. That's unless there's a political reason but you would know that. I mean, you would be a type where it's like, yeah, I kind of had it coming. They couldn't get me on this RICO charge, and so they're going to get me on this. But for most people, they're trying to say, really, we don't want to prosecute you. Really, just stop it, please stop it.
And it's important to stop doing whatever's causing the problem. So if you know you're doing it incorrectly, don't continue to do it incorrectly. Stop it, and then let's go back and fix and undo what we can.
A common thing there is the tax protesters. The tax protesters, guys, you know what? We're there with you in spirit. We're there with you, but I'm telling you what's going to happen. They're going to use those letters and all those things you're saying against you to convict you. So when you're doing that, and I did have a case where the gentleman was hired what he thought was a law firm to help him through the amnesty. He kind of saw the light. He saw the light. He's like, all right, I'm doing this tax protester thing. And I'm like, I don't think it's going to end well. And the people that I bought the program for, they don't seem to be all the most honorable people. I'm like, I don't like these guys. All right, you know what? I'm just going to bite the bullet and clean this up and get on with my life. He hired some guy who said he was a tax attorney and was going to solve it. And he was just like one of these resolution places in California or Florida. Surprising amount of money he charged, a lot. And basically all that this person did, who was not an attorney, was stonewalled the IRS and didn't get any of the returns done, didn't have the client make the estimated payments, didn't file the current year's returns. So as the IRS could see, it's like, what the hell? This guy's not getting it. And now he hired this guy to stonewall us. Well, screw that. We know how to do this. There goes the indictment.
You can't out IRS the IRS.
Yeah, so I tried to, I tried to pull him out of the fire, and it was a little too late. So they were like, no. And then we finally, and I looked, and nothing was done to get this guy in compliance. And if he came to us, there was no way. He would have been done with this, and there would be no way he would have been indicted. And it just really, really sucks. And that's one of the things. If you're looking for that amnesty, stop the crap. Understand, they're the ones. The judge will tell the Bureau of Prisons to take you and put you in that prison.
Prison's no fun.
No.
All right. So the first type we'll talk about is tax evasion exposure without foreign income.
Right. And that's our standard voluntary disclosure. There you're looking at 6 years of compliance. You get into your 6 years of compliance, and there you just got to make sure you check with the local prosecutor, make sure there's no indictment. Most people have most people are not under indictment. The people who are in investigation tend to believe they're invincible. So they're never the ones to use this.
Okay. Because this is like if you filed a tax return where you didn't state all your income on purpose,
Right.
you know you did it.
Right.
So it's sort of like coming clean.
Yeah. It's coming clean. And I kind of definitely wasn't trying to defraud the U.S. government. And so there you go, 6 years, you pay your back taxes due. There's not much other penalties there. And you can just, the IRS will never care that you did this at once. Their goal with all of this, get in compliance now and the future. That's what the past is stuff that can be forgiven. But what can't be forgiven is now and the future.
What happens if you do this year after year?
I don't know. Yeah, then they probably won't take it well,
the first time you're saying you forgot and you came clean and now you forgot again.
Well, there's really not much advantage to that because you'd have to do it every 6 years.
Yeah.
To be safe, but you're really not safe. So, yeah, I don't think that comes up. Yeah.
All right. What about tax evasion exposure with unreported foreign income?
Yeah, the foreign income is really the third rail right now. The IRS this is where they're putting all their attention. There's so many of their auditors are being trained on this, and where the IRS was 3 years ago on this and where they are today is just vastly different. We were constantly educating IRS auditors on how to treat this income in the past, but now they know. They're coming in like, oh, here's our calculations on it, and then we're matching up our calculations, and we're looking like, oh, they know what they're doing.
And this is innocent mistake or not.
Innocent mistake or not. The IRS, so they're training these people. As we're going through the offshore disclosure programs, they're training these people to be super sharp, and the ones who get it are rising to the top. And so we know that the IRS is going to have all these really highly trained auditors. And then, you got to what are they going to do? You think they're going to go audit the plumbers now? It's like, they're going to keep on, because that's where the money is. And there was an article out from the IRS issued a report. The Treasury Inspector General issued a report of audits of 2014. And they said the IRS assessed more taxes with far fewer examiners. And the reason why was because there was a few high income where they were able to get big dollars. And with the offshore stuff, that's where you get big dollars. If someone has a domestic penalty, the worst you're going to get is like the fraud penalty. But that's all based on the amount of tax you owe. When you go foreign, those penalties are based on account value.
Wow.
Not on income. So you could even lose money.
Right.
And it doesn't matter. You still get a horrible penalty. And so that's where, the IRS budget is still low.
Oh, they're very short-staffed.
They're short-staffed. And so they want to give that report to Congress to say, hey, look how hard we're working. So they can go in and evenly distribute their abilities across various business sectors. Or they could just go for that sweet plum right there of ripe targets offshore, anyone with offshore. So that's really a huge thing. And that's why it's really critical people with that start thinking about, if they haven't gotten clean, to really start thinking about it. And this is what's going to be the story for the next 5 to 10 years, I would say.
Because you can avoid the IRS until you can't. All right. So last, we'll talk about amnesty for those with little or no tax evasion exposure. So like unfiled domestic income, you said that's very common with the self-employed.
Yeah, it's incredibly common. One of the Google search terms, haven't filed taxes in 10 years.
Ooh.
Haven't filed in 20 years. And a lot of those people will think, oh my God, the IRS is going to come after me, haven't filed. Well, they can. There's situations, then there's no one who isn't safe. But really, in this case, you haven't filed anything. Mm-hmm. As opposed to compare that to somebody who filed a return. I swear this is everything I've done. Okay, that's an easy case to prosecute. Mm-hmm. You said this was your income. This is what it really is. Now, what about the person who didn't file anything? Why didn't you file? You know what? I'm a procrastinator, which is true. Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't want to raise any flags because I haven't filed, and I thought I'd get myself in more trouble if I filed by filing. So I didn't know what to do. I was afraid. I wasn't trying to evade taxes. I was just afraid of what was going to happen. Mm-hmm. Not a great case, especially when you have so many of the other ones that are easy. Why go after one of these hard ones when there's the easy ones? And when there's an easy tax protester one, where someone wrote, tell me the authority you have to assess taxes. I will not file this. I'm going to use this scheme not to pay you. Mm-hmm. That's an easy one. But the person who says nothing and didn't take any steps to conceal income, didn't take any steps to avoid payment, just didn't pay, didn't file.
Yep.
That's really a case where there's not going to be a lot of exposure. So the policy is that we go and file the last 6 years of returns.
Okay.
And then the IRS is fine with that. And that's their official policy. That's fine. Now, what happens usually, though, and that's when we started that's usually what we did. But what's happened now is the IRS is much better with a program called the automatic underreporter system. There's so many more 1099s going around.
Oh, the Oz.
The Oz, right? So the IRS can assess the substitute filed return. So we'll have to go back and amend those to lower that, because when the IRS does the return for you, they're not going to do you any favors.
Oh, yeah.
So usually it's not 6 years. We're usually doing the last 4 years we're filing, and then we're amending SFRs for previous years.
Gotcha.
But sometimes, there are cases where we're just doing 6 years. That's the other thing too. If the IRS filed a substitute filed return on you and you accepted it, you accept it by default. Well, you're agreeing that there's a tax due, basically. And now in order for something criminal to erupt, you would have to take active measures to frustrate the collection of the debt. It's not a crime to owe the IRS money. It's not. Mm-hmm. But if you have the money and you're making it hard for them to get it, and you're putting it in somebody's name, you're doing something, let me gift it to my dog, or, it's one of those things like, well, now you're making it easy for them.
Yep.
So in cases like that, you would just, in cases you did do something like that, you would just, undo the transaction. It's, it's a fraudulent conveyance, and the IRS knows that trick. It's nothing new. Yeah. You didn't.
Oh, they got us. They figured it out, man.
World, it's fraudulent conveyance of dissipated asset. There's a whole bunch of rulings on that.
And then what's the Fresh Start program?
Well, the Fresh Start is a program that I don't know if there's going to be an end date to it. A Fresh Start is probably going to be, it's been around for 3 years now. Mm-hmm. So there's in there is just some better, it's all the same programs. There's nothing new in there, except actually the first time penalty abatement actually might be new, because it came about. Yeah, I have to check on that. But what they're looking at is just different guidelines. That when it was first passed, they had some offer and compromise guidelines. Oh, they were awesome. And they picked up on it too. So they adjusted them. Still good, but not. When we saw those, we're like, oh my God, we got it. And now you're trying to tell people, you're trying to market like, really, this is the best time to file an offer and compromise. I'm not kidding. And no one believes you. So it was just, luck of those clients who got in it. It's still good. It's better than it was prior to the Fresh Start.
Yep.
No question about it. Then they threw in some places where they'll get your lien. Before they would file liens for everything, and I talked about the $54 lien that cost the IRS more to file it than what they could possibly collect. So they have some better lien things going on there. If you're in a direct debit, they're not going to give you a hard time, and if you owe certain amounts, they won't require all these financial documents. So the Fresh Start is definitely a thing. But it's really not. It's just guidelines to already existing programs.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I think most important what we want to touch on after this last break is we want to talk about FBAR and OVDP.
Okay.
We're really going to get into it right after this. Anthony, tell me about your recurring nightmare.
It's that nightmare where you're yelling, but no words are coming out of your mouth.
I have a similar nightmare where I'm in an emergency, I need to dial 911, and my phone won't work.
That sounds terrifying.
It is. And I think I know why we have these dreams.
Why is that?
The problem with the IRS isn't just the IRS. The problem is that people don't see the IRS for the horrible risk it presents.
I think you're right. We spend so much of our time trying to warn people about the IRS, but sometimes I wonder if our words go unheeded.
But the IRS can be dealt with the right team and the right preparation.
Can IRSMedic be the right team for someone with an IRS problem?
Yes, but only if they see the IRS as a problem.
IRSMedic, the law offices of Parental, and Wynn, LLP, real tax attorneys for tough tax problems.
We're back on Parental Advisory talking about federal tax amnesty, and you had touched, Anthony, on FBAR and OVDP, but wanted to go into a little more detail to make people understand exactly what they are and if they should be scared, what they should do.
Yeah, the word FBAR, there's actually, when this sort of erupted, there's I think a restaurant in Houston called FBAR.
Did they change their name?
Yeah, I know,
quickly?
the poor thing, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, wow, there's a lot of people who are looking to file things with us. We're a restaurant.
It seems to instill fear in people sometimes.
Yeah, the FBAR is, and I mean, it's confusing all around because if the form is the offspring of the Bank Secrecy Act of 1970. It's a report of foreign financial accounts. So even the acronym doesn't match up.
Nope.
It's FBAR, but what? And now it's actually not, it's not even an IRS form, but the IRS administers it. And it's actually a form of the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network that you have to file, and which is just, I mean, I think it's obscene because financial crimes, and it's just for everybody if you have it. So why do you have to submit something that implies you're a criminal for having a foreign account? It's just incredibly obnoxious.
Oh, that's true.
And there's, I'm sure we will do a whole episode on some of the outrages, but the FBAR is definitely, it moves around and it goes something like this. Somebody hears something from a friend or a cousin about this FBAR form and they're like, no, and they kind of ignore it, like, no, that can't be right at all. That can't be right. There's no way. But part of them's like,
It is the IRS.
It is the IRS, right? They would administer something that's not even their form, and they would horribly punish us. And we had a client who, this was a good quote. A client flew in from Pittsburgh and with his wife, and his wife said, I've never seen a man run that fast without something chasing behind him. Speaking of his husband.
Wow.
When he learned about this, he was, and I know he is he is a fan of the podcast. So we appreciate the candle. By the way, it's lovely. It is. It's a very nice candle. We will in the summertime we'll put that out on the porch. So the FBAR is something that if you don't file it and the IRS feels you're willful. And I'm going to go with feels because it's not objective. There's a 50% penalty on the account value.
Wow.
Yeah. And so regardless of if it made money. And then there's things that are subject to FBAR filing requirements that people aren't aware of, like foreign life insurance, like certain types of pensions. Not all pensions. Don't want to freak everybody out, but certain types of pensions, certain types of Social Security equivalents from around the world. There's all these things that even people who filed FBARs, oh, I knew I had to file my FBARs. And they'll say, well, you have this foreign life insurance. You didn't do that. What? Like, oh, yeah. And you didn't file your excise tax return on that either, did you? What? Oh, yeah, there's a 1% excise tax, Form 720. You didn't do that either. Huh? Yeah, so it gets, people go sort of into a justifiable panic mode with this FBAR form. If you're lucky, you can get non-willful penalties of $10,000, or maybe there's penalty mitigation. And you see, for the IRS, this is an issue of framing penalties, right? It's framing that. The top penalty could be 50% or $100,000. So if I'm going to penalize someone $10,000, I'm catching them a break. It's like that example in business school we're taught about how Williams Sonoma or somebody had a bread maker that was sold for $200. They couldn't sell one of them, so they came out with a bread maker that they sold for $800. Well, now the $200 bread maker ran off the shelf. And so that's the problem that you have with FBAR penalties. These auditors are looking at this incredibly high number they can penalize you, and if I only give you $10,000 a couple times, I'm catching you a break. When if you look at what their underreporting penalty would have been or late filing penalty, you're talking $1,000 total.
Right.
But now they're like, well, I'll catch you a break, $20,000 penalty. Or, you know what, I'll give you a break. I'll only assess the willful penalty once. Because I could do it for 6 years, which would be 300% of 3 times of what you owe. So look at what a great person I am. And that's the real problem that we have with it. Rand Paul is trying to sue on it, and he's got counsel that won Citizens United. They tried something. They did lose something. The case is still going. But
do you think there's a chance?
There's a chance, but you're asking the government to police itself. And there's, again, tell me that lobby in Washington, D.C. that cares about people with investments overseas. There's one lobby group, and they're
lame.
They don't have, it's like you have to be hobnobbing.
It's like the loser lobby
group.
group.
I mean, I want to say that they're just small.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that they're not losers. They just don't have the influence. You need a bankroll, and you need some big time donors who are going to invite politicians to their place in Palo Alto or wherever the hell it is and put a fundraiser together. Just lobbying and saying, here's our position paper and why this is unfair, that's ignored.
That's so friggin' sad.
That's ignored so easily. There's no person in their face. There's no person in their face saying, I could bundle a lot for you, but I need you to do this for me. So where does that happen? And that's why it's going to take something, it's going to take some principled legal decision for someone to say, wait a second, these FBAR audits violate the Eighth Amendment. These are excessive penalties.
Yep. But
it's just not the way it's going to go. And the IRS does adjust things too, because they know it's there. Like, well, let's not go too crazy. So in every case, in some cases we will, just to put it out there. But okay, well, now we'll go and do a mitigation. Look, we've mitigated. They have a whole, in the Internal Revenue Manual, there's a whole FBAR penalty mitigation. And so it's that whole thing. But your starting point is this high, but we're mitigating.
So nice.
Honor. We're mitigating these penalties from completely unrealistic amounts that are more than what the person owes.
Right.
To, well, look, it's only $10,000. When it's like, well, what was the unreported tax? I don't know. There wasn't any. Well, what crime? And by the way, the FBAR was passed to crack down on criminal organized crime because they were using money back and forth. And they said, well, we know these guys are going to use the banking system to help their clandestine activities. And so this will give us a backdoor. We know they're not going to file an FBAR.
Right.
So we know, and it's going to be hard for them for us to arrest them on whatever they're going to do. We know they didn't file an FBAR, so we got this. You guys didn't file an FBAR, got you. So it's supposed to crack down on international crime, and all it's done is sort of made our tax administration a little bit criminal.
Yeah, and you know what? It seems like one of those going after international criminals can be a little dangerous.
Right. And
so perhaps it's like, well, we could just go after 10 of these regular guys and get their money.
Yeah. Do you really want to go after the international criminal? Oh, you're reading about and
like a drug cartel?
He just poisoned some guy with polonium. Is that the one? There's like, is that even a thing? It's like, what is that? And you read out like, it's a radioactive thing that takes you 3 years to kill, and as you're dying horribly, polonium poisoning.
Okay, so let's not go after that guy.
I'm not doing that. And then and he was a world-class sniper. And like, car bomb. Like, no, I'm not. Right. And would you do that? No. And I'm like, and I get it. I get why you don't want to go after those guys. But just because you're not going to go after those guys, don't try to make someone else into that criminal mastermind for your press release so that you look like a hero.
Right.
Don't do that, man. Come on. They're just a regular person. Like it wasn't the most sophisticated thing in the world. They just didn't put it on a tax return.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the extent.
All right. So if people have questions, if they should be filing FBARs or not,
Yep.
that's another time when you would want to contact an attorney.
Yeah.
Because it's not something you can just go on irs.gov and figure out yourself easily.
Not easily. Not the average
No.
person. Not. There's certainly people that can. There's absolutely people.
There's going to be a
who can.
400-page document.
And there's usually, and I think it's not necessarily it's what you see in front of you, and collaboration on this is a lot. I know what I know, but getting together a bunch of great minds is always helpful. That's what we try to do here.
Yep.
And that if you do have unfiled FBARs, you may have to do the offshore voluntary disclosure program, which can be a bit of a pain, be a bit pricey. But the IRS did come out with that new amnesty of the streamlined process. And really, for expats, you got to do it. Because you know how I said for domestic, you have to go back 6 years?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the streamline, you go back 3.
No kidding.
Yeah. So it's like, guys, and it's like,
guys.
you know how I said, this is the time to file an offer and compromise?
Yeah.
This is the time to come clean. This is really the time. The streamline thing is here. It's better than the domestic regular voluntary disclosure. I mean, if you're doing something criminal, you'd want to do the OVDP, but man, you're looking at 3 years instead of the 6.
Good to know.
And that could be less in tax. And then if you have a foreign tax exclusion or credit, your taxes are nothing. And if you're living overseas, your penalty is a big fat 0. If you're in the U.S., it's 5%, which is a big break. But overseas, I'm like, I don't know how long this is going to last.
Yeah.
I'm not thinking this one will last forever, because at some point, how could you not know this program existed?
Right.
So when it ends, it's not going to be as nice. That is for sure, because this is as best as it's going to get. The earlier programs, people were just saying, no. They weren't doing it. But this one, now people are, okay, yeah, this looks good. So people are going for this one. Don't be the last, because you're not going to get the best.
Got it. I think we could do a whole podcast about FBARs and OV. I feel like we could sit and talk about that forever.
Yeah.
Maybe we will. All right, next week is Thanksgiving week, but we will still be here broadcasting live on Parental Advisory. We have some really good topics we want to touch on. High income audits, which you spoke about briefly. Yep. I'm excited to talk about that one.
Yeah.
It just sounds like a little bit.
Yeah, I think we'll
corruption.
go into more of the penalties and how they're targeting. And then I was just reading something right before here from another report from the taxpayer or the inspector general about how the IRS also considers high income, which is somewhat crazy. I also want to talk about we're going to go inside the IRS offer and compromise a little bit more. I think that's a natural segue from today.
Yep.
And lastly, this one was spawned from a conversation. There's a bank in Panama who has the idea that, what we'll be both the bank and the law firm. Therefore, the attorney-client privilege will protect you from the IRS finding out about your tax evasion. It's there on their website still. Yeah.
Get out.
Yeah.
Oh,
and by the way, guys, it doesn't work that way. No. It just doesn't work that way. And we'll go into that a little bit more.
All right. Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today on Parental Advisory. Thanks for joining Parental Advisory, hosted by Anthony Parent, produced by Claudine Gindel, that's me, engineered by Chris Chen. For more podcasts, visit our website at parentaladvisoryshow.com and like us on Facebook to submit story ideas. We'd like to thank our sponsors, IRSMedic.com, the law offices of Parent, and Wynn, LLP, real tax attorneys for tough tax problems.